My number one is Notting Hill. Directed by Roger Michelle, written by Richard Curtis, should be mentioned, starring Julia Roberts, Hugh Grant, a bunch of other folks. Quick logline: a life of a simple bookshop owner changes when he meets the most famous film star in the world. So I had to go with, you know, the fantasy of it all. And this is what this movie captures for me: the fantasy and the magic, the stuff that
Yeah.
people can't don't believe in. But I, and sounds like you do too, believe in.
I
So
do, yes.
yeah, this is why this movie is here. And to me, it's the movie star stuff is a whole other thing, and we can get into that. And I love that secretly this movie is also a movie about Hollywood, especially from like a press tour standpoint, which was
Yeah.
very illuminating, and learned a lot. But I think to me, for me, this movie has always resonated because of Hugh Grant and his character, of how his, once again, sort of lonely, mundane, but loved life in a beautiful part of the world, uh, kind of changes overnight. And unlike the other meet cutes that we've talked about, where the two people want to be with each other because there's attraction and they
Right.
want to sort of make that happen. Here, it's actually quite layered. Like
hmm
Julia Roberts is a massive star. She's kind of playing a version of herself. She's sort of in this and goes on with the mute cute because it's giving her a bit of a hideout, and it's kind of a refreshing thing that she's hanging out with like a nobody as opposed to the
Mm.
life that she normally has, versus he actually has no agency. He just
Right.
starstruck,
Right.
and is sort of just in it and sort of for the ride. So I don't even think that he knows that there is attraction there. I mean, there is because you're
Mm.
with a movie star, but I don't think it's sort of fully felt. And I think that's an interesting take where the power dynamics and power balance between the two people who are in the mute cage is just so vastly different that it
hmm
creates like a whole other dynamic, which I think is quite interesting. um I also love, and by the way, I should stop there and say, had you watched this movie before or no?
No, I'd actually, yeah, I'd never seen this. I want to say, I don't want to say avoided it, but I don't like
Mm.
Julia Roberts or
I know this
like,
about you.
yeah, pre 2012 Hugh Grant was on my like do not watch list too. Though
Oh
now he's on it
no.
and I love him. But I'll get to my thoughts on the film actually. But I was, yeah, I had not seen this. I had not seen this before. Yeah.
Okay. Um, but yeah, and then I think what I love is about this movie is how it progresses. And even though there's this power dynamics imbalance and he
hmm
doesn't have much agency, but you see a lot about his character, and he comes through and he stands up for himself, which he didn't really have to per se. And then after everything that happens, you sort of see her actually meeting her where he's at, as opposed to the other way around, which I thought is interesting. The other thing I would say is that about this movie that always has caught my heart is his own sort of family friend life. Like
Oh
that,
yeah.
that
Yeah.
intro dinner is probably in my top 10 or 20 of movie moments for ever, because it's
hmm
just so funny and sweet and heartfelt, and I just want to be at that dinner table.
Oh yeah. Classic Richard
I,
Curtis. Like classic,
yeah,
like the dialogue and the
great
character
writing,
dynamic is just like he's nailing it. Yeah.
nailing it. And like you said, like this probably of all the movies that we've touched on, and at least for me, in terms of the kind of the side peripheral players and the cast in general, everybody is just absolutely incredible. Who's
Totally. Yeah.
along for the ride. Not to mention, Riz, his roommate, who's
Yeah.
sort of annoyingly irritating but charming at the same time. And I don't know. I also watched this movie when I guess I was in my phase of watching a lot of British stuff and kind of falling in love with it. So
Yeah.
it's kind of an interesting contrast where, the preppy, slightly posh, bumbling, adorable Hugh Grant versus sort of the crass, out there, literally out there, friend of his, a roommate of his. So I don't know. I find this, though it's silly and what have you, I find this very charming, and it's a great, you know opposite forces of sweet,
Mhm.
adorable, sometimes annoying person versus magnetic, sometimes mean, selfish person. And I think there is an interesting thing between the two actors, but also the two personality types, which you don't often see that. I think it's actually way more layered as a
Mhm.
character study of these two people and their worlds than a typical rom-com movie could be or would be, thanks to Richard Curtis's
Right.
writing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, I avoided this film. I guess though I love Richard Curtis, like
Mm-hmm.
Blackadder, Mr. Bean are some of my favorite,
Mm-hmm.
TV stuff. So I was surprised that I enjoyed this movie actually.
Oh, good.
So I think the two things that helped me were, first of all, like I do not really like Julia Roberts, and now that she's sort of gone, she's less in your face, gone, like she's not really in movies anymore as much, and it was easy for me to swallow her there. And then with Hugh Grant, who I really didn't like for the longest time, my opinion on him's changed in the last 10 years as he's sort of gone to more self-deprecating, kind of playing like
Mhm.
a jerk in movies. Now I kind of like him, so I can kind of relate a little bit more. And it's interesting, like, to me, I read this movie as a movie about when you're in a relationship but you feel like you're inadequate, like you're with
Mhm.
someone who's hotter than you, or you're with someone who makes more money than you, or whatever it is. Like, you feel like there's this power dynamic there,
Mhm.
but you still like the person, but you feel like you don't deserve to be in the relationship that you're in. And that was, I was really focused on Hugh Grant's journey in this film, maybe just
Same.
as the guy, right? I focus more on the guy, and I'm not
I think the movie
a
is
movie
from his point
star.
of view for
It
the
is,
most
no,
part,
true. It is
Yeah.
definitely on its point of view. So I felt this movie was about his journey to, like, oh, maybe I feel something with this woman, but I'm not in the same league as her. She's a movie star. And then as they're going about their relationship and kind of starting things, he's still sort of like, oh, kind of embarrassed to sort of be around her. And these are all natural feelings. You don't have to be dating a world, known movie star to be feeling inadequate in a relationship of, like, oh, I feel like I'm the one who's not supposed to be in this. Those are definitely, I think, feelings that a lot of us have had in various relationships. And it's about that journey of sort of realizing, no, like, the love and the care that you have for this person actually makes you then feel very comfortable. And at the end, I think,
Mhm.
with the end of the movie where now they're pregnant and or she's pregnant, and they're on this back in one of the first places they met in that park bench. You really get the sense that Hugh Grant is no longer kind of feeling undeserving. Like, he feels
Yeah.
safe now with her, which is something that I think if you're in it for the long haul and you have a real connection and there's real love there, those feelings of inadequacy kind of fall to the wayside. And so I was sort of tracking that journey of his character and making it more about dating someone who you feel like you're not worthy of. And Richard Curtis was just kind of taking it to the extreme and, like, oh, this is like a world-class celebrity who no one would ever run into, a Julia Roberts somewhere and strike up a conversation with her. And this never would happen. But what does happen is something a little more grounded of, you're with a girl or a guy and you feel like, I shouldn't be with this person, but I feel
Right.
like I love them. They're giving me attention. This is weird. Like, but you don't really feel like it's going to ever work out. And then, it does if there's that love there and you prove to each other that, you do, like Julia Roberts, I think, just proved to him that, like, you were my safety. Like, you
Right.
do serve a purpose to me. Like, you're not just some random fling of, like, oh, I want to be with a Joe Q public. It's like, no, like, I'm escaping a life that I don't want to be in. And you're that safety. You're that home for me. And I think that helped him just realize that this was something real and not something that was just, she was using him for some particular reason.
Exactly. And I think
Um,
she finds a lot more in that too, because
yes,
that
no,
she
she
goes on
does.
her own journey, because
Right,
she, feels that escape and what have you in the beginning, but clearly there are other forces sort of pulling her back, and she
right,
has to go through her own journey to realize that, well, actually, what I have been missing in my life is this. So,
right, right.
so I think it sort of makes sense. Also, the way they play on, oh, a famous person is in our midst is, I
Right.
think, some of the best reaction acting
Yes. Oh God. Yeah.
I've seen across the board. Like,
Yeah.
it made me think of it because, as you were saying, this would probably not happen to most of us, but if it did, it would be kind of crazy and
Hmm.
incredible. And I think they pull it off. Like, and I think there's a big audience surrogate moment happening there too, because we are also, because we know who she is
Right.
and we know how improbable this would be. So when this does happen, and I remember like watching this movie the first time with my jaw open, my mouth
Hmm.
open the entire time, the first 20 minutes, that, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is happening. So
Right. Yeah.
They
No,
really sell that.
definitely. And I think that's where the key of having Julia Roberts be in that role, which it was interesting that it made me think like there's a lot of roles she was doing around that same time where she was basically playing herself.
Mm-hmm.
America's Sweethearts, and then the
Mm-hmm.
Ocean's movies. She's playing she actually literally played Julia Roberts in the second one.
Right.
Just kind of an odd turn for a career. But if this was another actress, actually, I was reading up on this a little bit that like Nicole Kidman was really trying to get into this role.
Mm.
And Richard Curtis said, like, you're not famous enough. Like you can't, you're not the right thing. And I think he was right. Like, it's great. I mean, I love Nicole Kidman even better than Julia Roberts as an actress, but you needed someone who the audience was like, oh my God, that's Julia Roberts. Like,
Yeah.
if it was someone, again, to pull from Serendipity, like Kate Beckinsale playing a celebrity, it's like, okay, well, like, okay,
There's
you're
a
not
big
bringing
meta
enough.
quality to this.
You need
100%.
that.
Yeah.
You need that in there, and that makes the audience again really relate to that dinner table scene of like, yeah. You think, what if Julia Roberts was like hanging out with my friend's apartment? Like, I would, even though I'm not a fan of hers, like I would still be like, oh my God, this freaking Julia Roberts. Like, you need that angle in there. I think she does a great job in playing this part too. As much as I'm not a big fan of hers, I think I was sort of understanding in certain scenes, like, oh yeah, she does have that thing that people love. Like, it was kind of affecting me a little bit. I was like, oh, Julia Roberts.
I'm glad.
Like,
I'm a big fan of hers.
Yeah,
Always have been. And I think it's pretty, I don't want to use the word brave, but I think it's pretty daring of her to do a part like this at
agreed.
the height of her powers, and kind of play a pretty unlikable, selfish person at times, but also let the audience see the charm and the magnetism and all of that come through as well. So I'm very glad that you like this movie.
Hey there, it's Alex. If you like the review and discussion Karan and I just had, make sure you subscribe to our channel, Movies That Shaped Us, to get full episodes. Every other Wednesday, Karan and I cover a topic around important people, places, events, and moments in our lives, and then explore it through 3 of our favorite movies. Subscribe right now, or follow our podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts via the link in the description below. Hope you join us for the journey.